Okay, colleagues, good morning, and hopefully we're live. Hello and welcome back. So, what better way to start the day than to talk about the most important questions of human existence, um, the questions of political philosophy, right? The meaning and purpose of human life, but also the meaning of and purpose of existence of humanity in the universe at large. Why not? Why not? Um, so, you know, this is going to be a slightly more informal video, and it's not really a lecture in modern political theory, but more like an accompanying video, right? A bit of a place to reflect on the thinkers that we have covered so far. So basically, I think that we're far enough in the course that we can talk about some of the bigger ideas, some of the broader implications and repercussions of what we've been talking about. And so in many ways, I want to talk about all six thinkers at the same time. So our six thinkers are Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Mill, Hegel, and Marx. So in many ways, the choice has been made for us, but I think it's a wonderful choice, and I am, broadly speaking, prepared to defend the choice of these specific six thinkers from first principles. Let me start somewhere. So, political philosophy. Let me start in ancient Greece with Plato. I want to say that one of the most fundamental questions of political philosophy already that we see in the works of Plato, right, and Plato here responding to the sophists, is this deep and very important question of the interest of society and the interest of the individual. So what is the relationship between the interest of the individual versus society, right? And especially we have the challenge of the sophists, specifically of people like Thrasymachus, very famously in the first book of Plato's Republic. So there's Thrasymachus, there's Callicles in Plato's Gorgias, and there's also Antiphon and others, right? But let's talk about Thrasymachus and just stick with Thrasymachus and Callicles, right? And also the famous story told by Glaucon in the first, again not in the first, but in the opening books of Plato's Republic about the ring of Gyges, the ring of invisibility, right? The ring that makes a person invisible, right? And the upshot is, in many ways, is this notion that nobody would be just if they could get away with injustice. And in many ways, the challenge that Plato sets for himself, again, Plato writes dialogues, not treatises, so let's say the challenge that Plato presents Socrates as responding to is this idea of whether society can be based on such a foundations, whether there's such an arrangement, social arrangement, if you want, where there is no conflict between the interest of individual and the interest of society, right? So again, if we talk about Plato's Republic, I want to say that the highest human excellence is achieved through philosophy. It is expressed through philosophy, but it is enabled. So the excellence of philosophy is uniquely enabled by the structure of the Callipolis, right? So of Plato's Republic. This idea that the highest human happiness achievable, right, has to be enabled by the structure of a harmonious city. And so there's the individual benefits from a harmonious social arrangement, but in response, part of what the guardians are going to do is that they're gonna the philosopher kings and queens, right, are going to contemplate the eternal forms, this quasi-ascetic ideal of contemplation, right? But in order to continue contemplating the forms, they need to go back down in the cave and make sure that the society is running smoothly, because the smooth running of society is the condition of them contemplating the eternal forms. So contemplation of eternal forms, but in general, this idea of contemplation, right? And I am tempted to compare this maybe, well, I mean, you can sort of have this word here, ataraxia, right? Because this is a quasi-ascetic ideal. So ataraxia means freedom from disturbance, serenity or calmness, right? Serenity or calmness, right? Tranquility. That this is the source and the realization of human happiness, right? The highest realization of humanly possible happiness, right? And this is a quasi-ascetic ideal, right? So this has relation to asceticism. Again, not as self-denial, but as self-assertion, as the highest expression of the harmony of the human soul and of human happiness, right? And from time to time, maybe I will be referring to Buddhism, because Buddhism for me is a very important interlocutor in all of this. And in Buddhism, definitely, this idea of ataraxia, broadly speaking, is at least in some respects analogous to the idea of Buddhist nirvana. And again, this notion of meditative contemplation, the state of calm and the state of tranquility. And Buddhism also has a political project of Buddhism, so something to keep in mind, right? Should I talk about Epicurus here? Well, I don't know, maybe, who knows? So what, Buddhism, Epicurus. Epicurus talks less about contemplation, but still there's something there, right? So this is Plato. If we then proceed to talk about Aristotle a little bit, right? So without going into too many detail, so Aristotle's vision of the perfect ideal life is different from Plato's, especially because Aristotle is not really an ascetic, or like he's not attuned to this ascetic ideal, right? So for Aristotle, the human eudaimonia, human flourishing, has to do with the expression of human potentialities, right? So this is he says the excellence, okay, excellence of the human soul, but the soul here refers to human function, right? So the excellent exercise of all human functions, or of the highest human functions. Excellent exercise of human functions, right? Excellent exercise, excellent development and exercise, development and exercise of the highest human functions. Human abilities, let's write abilities, right? This is an ideal that we will see in broad outline, right? So I keep referring to, so we can compare this to John Stuart Mill, we can compare this to Hegel, we can compare this to Marx, right? And I feel that there's an important comparison to be made here. There are important Aristotelian elements in Mill, Hegel, and Marx. And what is very important is that this excellent development and excellent exercise of highest human abilities is dependent on society, right? So this is the famous phrase, zoon politikon, that proper human happiness and flourishing is possible only in a well-ordered society. Sorry, like only in a well-ordered society. Right. So this is the basic notion. This is in many ways, these are the questions that we get out of the ancient Greeks. But notice that kind of the critical element, I suppose, is also important, because for both Plato and Aristotle, not every society is necessarily good, right? So we have to remember the sophistic challenge. Is the actual society, so sophistic challenge, is any society good, right? And Sophists have another challenge, and sophists may challenge this view of ataraxia and may challenge this consensus view. So I suppose, let's try to separate the sophistic challenge into two parts. There's this, critical, foreshadowing of later critical theory by the sophists, right? Is any society good? Could society be exploitative and abusive? Right? And we can think of Rousseau's evil contract, right? Rousseau's evil contract, or Marx's idea of exploitation, right? So in this sense, the sophists leave something important to the posterity in terms of the Western political philosophy. But also there's another possibility that maybe this shadow possibility, maybe that harmony is in principle impossible. Harmony is impossible because human beings are conflictual by nature. And for one person to be happy, somebody else must be unhappy. Now, this possibility, let me maybe do something like this, like a strike through, because this is not taken seriously by later tradition by and large. I would say that even Nietzsche has this notion in general that the even sort of the potentially conflictual sides of let's say the Übermensch, right? Individuals still enable one another, right? So this, master morality, masters flourish by competing against one another. A master can appreciate a worthy adversary, right? So this is talking about master morality in Nietzsche. And so master is obviously not the Übermensch. These are two different concepts in Nietzsche. But even for the Übermensch, the community of other people is important, right? So Zarathustra lives in the mountain, but he comes down from the mountain to talk to the people, right? Even the Übermensch flourishes in a human community. So this is a strong assumption, and you could say, oh, it's a controversial assumption. Oh, maybe this assumption is wrong. And well, I suppose one, quasi-Darwinian, quasi-evolutionary reason, in terms of natural selection of ideas, why this notion of radical conflict is unpopular is because, like, if you were a political philosopher and you came up with a story in which humanity was radically conflictual, why would you trust other human beings? Why would you publish anything? Why would you talk to other human beings? Why would you share this idea? So I feel that in some way there's, even if there are some, I don't know, aliens among us, right, people from a different planet, something like that, for whom it is true that society is conflictual, they just don't bother writing anything about that. It's a little bit, it's like this view, I think, is somewhat self-defeating. We can maybe compare this view to solipsism. So compared to solipsism, I hope this was clear, at least on some level. So anyway, more to be said about this, but I think we can move forward, and let's imagine that we're done with the basic overview of the ancient Greek political philosophy. And this has taken us, how much, I wonder? About 10 minutes approximately, who knows. Anyway, let's continue. So yeah. So when we get to Hobbes, a very important transition that is taking place. So in the works of Hobbes, and I want to say, in this sense, Hobbes is really Machiavelli to some extent before him. So let me pay homage, at least in passing and mention Machiavelli. Machiavelli is an important precursor to Hobbes in this respect. I could talk about other philosophers, Giambattista Vico maybe, or Francis Bacon, but still. So let's just stick with Machiavelli, right? So for Hobbes, mechanistic worldview is going to be very important. So mechanistic versus Aristotelian teleological worldview. This is going to be a hugely important idea. Also, this notion of skepticism. Skepticism, versus certain ideas in dogmatism, but also incidentally also against religion. So secularism versus these dreams of theocracy. The mechanistic. Is there anything else I want to add here? So skepticism, mechanicism. Well, empiricism, yes, of course, empiricism. So these ideas are going to be hugely important. And in many ways, I want to say my own vision is that these are still the basic working assumptions of political theory in the 21st century, right? So we are still working within this framework. And in philosophy, there's no such thing as a knockdown argument, but basically, as far as one can tell, we're not going to go beyond this. There's no intimation, there's no reason to suppose that this picture is going to be overturned. If anything, I want to say that the advances in the fundamental sciences, the advances in physics, the advances in biology, the advances in neurophysiology, the advances in computational science, all of these point to the notion that Hobbes is right. Hobbes is right about all of this, and life is nothing but a motion of limbs. Now, keeping in mind the Schrödinger equation, matter, this idea of matter in motion, we have slightly different, slightly different conceptual baggage attached to this phrase, matter in motion. But it's still matter in motion, which obeys mathematical regularities. And in the Lagrangian of Sten model of particle physics, there is still no such thing as universal values. So this, in many ways, this is the most important notion here in the mechanistic versus teleological worldview. There's no natural morality, right? And this is why in Hobbes, there's no longer any, so natural morality, no natural or universal morality. And in this sense, Hobbes's laws of nature are really, he uses this phrase in a subversive fashion because there are no laws of nature. So this is this lawlessness of nature, no real laws of nature, right? Simply, again, a proto-Darwinian idea, Darwinian idea of the primacy of self-preservation, proto-Darwinian primacy of self-preservation, right? And it's important that for Hobbes, rights are more important than duties, right? So we have this fundamental right of nature, which is a right to all things, right to all things. In self-preservation, yes, but you are the judge. You are the judge of what this is, right? So in many ways, when we talk about Hobbes in terms of this matter in motion, right, what we mean is this deep amoralism, deep anti-moralism of Hobbes's political philosophy, right? And so these are the assumptions, and what this comes down to, basically, is this notion that society, in an important sense, is artificial. Society is artificial. Harmony is artificial, and society is artificial. So society is artificial. So humans are. Let me put this carefully. Humans are not pro-social by nature, right? Society is artificial. Harmony is artificial. Rights are artificial. So let's say the harmony and order are precarious and artificial, right? And this idea that rights are artificial, right? Rights are artificial. Humans have rights because there are social mechanisms that guarantee these rights. Rights don't exist, they're not natural, Rights have to be granted to us by society. Rights are, if you want, invented and granted by society. So Hobbes has this monarchical element in his theory, but I think that, like always when we are in doubt, right? So we have to remember that even monarchy exists with the consent, at least with the tacit or implicit consent of all the people, right? So in the earlier drafts of the Leviathan, Hobbes writes about how all regimes are actually essentially democracies, because the power of the government always has to exist with the consent of the people. It is only because the police go along, the police, the army, the lawyers, the courts, and the people at large. It's only because the people go along with the powers, with the secular authority, with the sovereign authority. Only because of that does government really have authority, right? So this is as opposed to, let's say, divine right of kings, right? So there's this important element of consent. Power is lies with the people, and the power of the sovereign power, comes from the wills of the people united. Wills of the people united. So wills of the people united in one sovereign power. So in this sense, this is an important democratic element in Hobbes, such that in some important sense, monarchy is popular monarchy, right? So Hobbes actually talks about how a monarch is a representative. Monarch is a representative of the people. Analogously with the parliament. Compare this to the parliament. Right? So we elect representatives to the parliament, and Hobbes says monarchy is a similar thing. And you could say, well, but what about conquest? Hobbes talks about the sovereignty by acquisition. But again, this is the crucially important central idea of Hobbes, namely that law and order are based on lawlessness and violence. Okay, let me try to optimize this a little bit. And so skepticism plus empiricism, secularism versus theocracy is, I would say, a consequence of Hobbes' empiricism. An important notion, maybe I'll come back to this, the role of religion. Anyway, so let me add here, humans are forsaken in this world. Right? God is incomprehensible. Even if God exists, God is incomprehensible. God does not intervene. God is incomprehensible. Which is, again, a very similar position to just simply asserting atheism. Right? An incomprehensible God and a non-existent God are closely related concepts, I would say. Although, again, Hobbes' own theological views are complicated and maybe not necessarily very clear. Anyway, so I was talking about how monarch is a representative of the people. So this is a brute fact that society is ultimately based on the fear of death. Right? And this is, in some sense, I want to say, this is the dirty secret of political philosophy, right? But I want to say that this is also a very important idea. So if we take Hobbes, if we take Rousseau, and if we take Marx especially, right? So for them, there's this very important idea, again, that society is ultimately coercive. Especially, when Rousseau and Marx are going to talk about the beginning of society, right? Ultimately coercive, at least this is how society gets going, at least in the beginning, right? So if you want, this is the original sin, right? That society is actually based on violence. So order and legitimacy is ultimately grounded in lawlessness and violence. And brute fact about the fear of death. And in this sense, I think Hobbes, I'm a huge fan of Hobbes' political philosophy. Hobbes is the first, not the last thinker in this course, because in some sense, he zooms out. I don't want to say too much, right? But we have to understand that, again, philosophical theories are not literally true or false. Philosophical theories, like any theory, like the theory of lambda CDM concordance cosmology or the Standard Model of particle physics, these are models. They're supposed to represent reality as an approximation, right? So they're never literally true, but they are more or less useful, more or less illuminating. And in this sense, Hobbes' unique strength lies in the fact that he zooms out so much, right? So Hobbes, in some sense, I want to say, provides the basic framework, the basic answer to the question as to why any society exists at all, why any society exists at all. Like the basic conditions of possibility of society, the basic conditions of possibility of any society. So starting with ancient despotisms, right? From ancient despotisms, right? Again, so violence as the root of political order, right? So from ancient despotisms, you know, why do slaves obey? Why slaves obey, right? To modern democracies, I would say. And again, this very important idea that we see in Hobbes, and you know, it's an idea in Hobbes, but this is an idea which has become crucial and foundational to all social theory, I would say. And this is the idea of Darwinian natural selection. This is how we explain life. This is how we explain the origin of life, the development of life, the development of multicellularity, the development of higher brain functions and whatever, right? Of language and of complex societies. There's competition, and competition between sovereigns in the sphere of international relations ensures that sovereigns will take care of the subjects, that sovereigns will take care of the subjects, because the strength of the sovereign is derived, the power of the sovereign is derived from the vigor of the subjects. That's the basic idea. That's the basic idea. And so Hobbes, at the same time, provides the basic conditions of the possibility of any society, but also provides the possibility of progress. So it's like the first big issue, and the second, the potential for progress. So when I say progress, I mean this. Progress, in, if you want, in a technical sense. Yeah. Progress in the sense of life becoming more palatable, more commodious, as Hobbes would say, for the average person, right? And this is I want to say, this is the strength of Hobbes's political philosophy. Now, do you want to talk about religion? Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll get to religion at some point. Religion is a big topic, and it's a problematic and controversial topic. And I want to say that in an important respect, there's a certain clash between religion and political philosophy. It's kind of the old argument goes back to Plato between poets, and poetry with religious poetry, like poetry of Homer and Hesiod, poetry versus philosophy. There's this old clash, and I want to say that, right? The poets tell lies. They give myths as to why we must submit, but it is only political philosophy that actually tells us what is the truth. What is the truth about? Well, truth is a very ambitious word, of course, but there's a certain clash. Like, if political philosophy is right, then religion, in some sense, is wrong. Religion is not true, but it's politically useful. Religion is not true, but politically useful. And I could go back, right? So we have this violence, right? So there's this violence, and the violence is of dual nature. We're talking about so the dual violence, right? Violence of the sword and violence of the pulpit, if you want. Violence, like symbolic violence. There's this, physical violence. physical violence of the sword, and there's, if you want, symbolic violence of ideology, and especially, again, religious ideology is always the core part of any kind of ideological system. So this is always kind of a complicated idea to talk about to students, because some students are religious. And it is a strong and controversial contention on my part, but I want to say that, you know, doing political philosophy seriously requires a certain kind of methodological assumption of atheism. This is what it means to do philosophy. To think, to dare to think for yourself and not accept things on faith. So again, this is an idea which I think goes back to the beginning of philosophy in the West, goes back to people like Socrates. I remind you that Socrates was executed by the people of Athens for impiety, for not believing in the city's gods. And in some sense, you know, I talked about the original sin of society. I want to say this is the original sin of philosophy. Again, it's a problematic position. I don't want to be controversial for the sake of being controversial, but you know, the way I see the matter, that's just the way things are, right? And of course, there are also important sociological arguments related to this against religion, in that if okay, so we have this Immanuel Kant with his picture. You know, people ask me why I'm not a fan of Kant. why do I consider Kant as a rival and as an antagonist? There are many reasons. This is one of the reasons, right? So Kant tries to delineate a certain safe space for religion, in which religion supposedly can exist without the interference of reason. And, you know, like from the standpoint of technicalities, I think, yes, skepticism has to cut both ways. And so if we are skeptical about religion, we should also be skeptical about science. So it's in principle possible for religion to be true, but I think Kant forgets something very, 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 very important. If any of us asks ourselves, if we ask ourselves, why are we religious, if we are religious, there's always a very crass, very banal sociological story. We are religious because our parents are religious. We are religious for political reasons. Anybody who's religious is religious for a political reason. Because, and again, this is the dirty secret of religion discovered by people like Marx and Nietzsche. Religion does not spring from the head of Zeus like Minerva, right? Like Athena. So the dirty secret of religion, right? That any religious person is religious. Well, I don't want to say any, okay, because I'm sure, again, skepticism has to cut always. The vast majority of religious people are religious because of their parents. Parents rely on their religiosity for parents or society. It is, you know, parents or society tells us what to have faith in, right? And so religion hopes or aspires for, you know, for itself, for religion to be true, right? So religion will say that religion is true, right? But political philosophy will say that no, religion is not true. It is socially useful. Religion is socially useful. So this is a limited defense of religiosity, and this is why, in some sense, I want to say that political philosophy is this kind of subversive, you know, and the subversiveness of political philosophy goes back to people like Socrates. This is why it's a bit of a challenge to study political philosophy, because we are exposing we are thematizing and exposing certain facts about human reality, human social reality, which are not very palatable, right? So okay, so if this is a conclusion, a hard-earned conclusion of political philosophy, should I go out in the street and just shout in the streets that sort of religion is just a tool of social control? Well, can the person in the street understand these words? Is anything going to become better? Are there going to be any positive consequences by shouting this in the street? So let me phrase this. You know, so exposing religion is this, like, will the people understand? Will the average person understand the criticism? And I want to say no, because political philosophy is not rocket science. Political philosophy is harder than rocket science. These things are hard to understand. It takes long training, which is why I feel that in the past there was always a place for an element of esotericism, that, like philosophers had esoteric teachings. There's an idea that Plato maybe had an esoteric teaching, right? Most religious traditions will have exoteric accessible part and then esoteric secret teaching, right? So why? Because the average person will hear the words but will not understand the words, right? And the second is this exposure, is this debunking, is this religious debunking going to be productive? However you want to define productive, right? And so, like, in this sense, my basic stance, again, from the standpoint of the philosophers in this course, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Mill, Hegel, and Marx, is that no, the average person will not understand, and no, this will not be productive. So the only two thinkers in this course who take religion on seriously are going to be Mill and Marx. But I think for both Mill and Marx, there's a certain understanding that you don't just go around attacking religion. So even Mill and Marx are going to say that even Mill and Marx don't just want some kind of, crass critique of religion. They imagine that religion will wither away. Religion will wither away as the circumstances change. But then the question is, even if religious forms will wither away, will there, an important religious element, will a religious element remain, right? And here I'm thinking about philosophers such as Durkheim or Rousseau, right? This idea that there's a certain element of religiosity in the sense that we should regard the social taboos as quasi-sacred. So this important religious element which is at the root of society. So social taboos, the sanctity or the sacredness, sanctity of the social bond, right? And Marx says, well, Mill very, very, very explicitly says that through laws and regulations, education and public opinion, children have to be brought up in a pro-social way. So I think immediately there's this quasi-religious element in there. It's not the same as full-fledged religion, but at least an important productive element, productive function that religion has served up until the point of secularization, right? For Marx, it's harder to say because Marx doesn't really explain very much what communism is going to be like, and he does talk about certain transparency in communism, that the social bond will be transparent, that you will not need taboos and the sanctity of the social bond. So, like for Mill, this seems to be an element, I think, of his end game for humanity. And for Marx, basically the question is, will communist society be transparent enough? Will be so harmonious, so transparent that even the idea of taboo and sanctity will wither away, that even these last vestiges of religiosity will wither away. And last vestiges of religion, even last. And I want to say it's a question. I think Marx's answer is on the surface yes, but is it? I'm not sure. So, again, if you ask people like Gramsci, with his idea of hegemony, supposedly it should be communist hegemony as well, or Lenin, right? How exactly do we organize communist society? How exactly will communist society be organized? And so, I think that there are reasons to suppose that maybe no, there will be religious elements even in communism. In many ways, maybe these, well, it's hard to say. Okay, it's like a topic for another day. Let me just pause here and proceed forward. So anyway, so I was talking about Hobbes, right? And so I was so let's try to talk about Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, right? So we have this idea in Hobbes that human beings are not naturally social, therefore, society is artificial, and social order is relatively precarious. Like, it's not guaranteed. It has to be protected, right? And Locke, I think he tries to fight against this, but we see, I feel that sort of I'm reading Locke a little bit against his own, like the letter of his writings, because I want to say that actually, if we read Locke carefully, we see the truth of Hobbes. Right? Deep reading of Locke exposes the truth of Hobbes. Deep reading of Locke exposes the truth of Hobbes. And I want to say that there are philosophers like Leo Strauss who actually prefer to read Locke this way. Strauss will say that Locke is simply Hobbes in sheep's clothing. But this idea that, okay, Locke is going to say, come on, human beings by nature have a certain kind of pro-social element in them. And this sounds approximately reasonable, right? That, think about this in terms of Rousseau's natural sympathy. Think about this in terms of, compare. So Locke on the laws of nature. Compare this to Rousseau on natural sympathy, right? What Rousseau calls pitié in French. And I think again, what does Locke say? He talks about individuals being bad judges in their own case, right? So we have these inconveniences of the state of nature, and it's basically one step from inconveniences to horrors, right? So inconveniences of the state of nature, especially this idea that individuals are not good judges in their own case, right? And so this casts the doubt as to whether society can be natural, right? And this reinforces the idea that social order is precarious, right? That at the end of the day, it seems that, like, even for Locke, it's not exactly clear how far can you trust people to cooperate outside of any artificial constructed human institutions, right? And again, always the key question for Locke, I think, is how do modern Lockeans, how would they explain failed states? Failed states and cases of civil wars and genocides, right? And Hobbesian answer is going to be that peace is hard fought and hard won, right? That states do not fail, right? Any state would fail unless there's a forceful coercive mechanism that keeps it from failing, right? Anyway, and so when we get to Rousseau, finally we get this. Okay, so let me maybe make this a new slide. So what I want to say, and maybe I should be wrapping this up, right? So I want to say Rousseau lays out a certain idea, and Hegel and Marx picks up and runs with it, right? So Hobbes basically says, life in society may be bad, but the alternative is worse, right? So we have to submit out of fear. So basically, submit out of fear, right? So the king of the children of pride, conquer pride through fear of death. Pride versus fear of death. But Rousseau acknowledges this, right? Rousseau talks about the evil contract, and he says, well, the people are forced to submit, and they do submit, right? What can you do? Again, evil contract is not a phrase that Rousseau uses, but it is a phrase which is used by commentators of Rousseau. So, but there's also a possibility of a true social contract. And the idea of a true social contract is this notion of society be based on real commonality of interest. So, genuine commonality of interest. And this idea of free obedience, right? That each remains as free as before and obeys only himself. So each obeys only herself, right? And the basic notion, and again, I keep returning to this over and over and over again, the basic premise of political philosophy for Rousseau, Hegel, and Marx, I would say, is this idea of the general will, right? So we have the rational will, which tells us, like, we freely choose to obey our rational will, so free obedience to my own rational will, which is equal to the obedience to the rational laws of my community, rational laws. Now, not every state is like this, right? So Jean-Jacques Rousseau is not Jean-Jacques Stalin. It's important to remember, right? So true social contract is a rare occasion for Rousseau, but this is a possibility, right? And so I want to say that when we compare Rousseau to Hegel and Marx, basically we have this basic idea of free obedience in Rousseau, and then the question in Hegel is how can we make this work in a fully fledged nation state? And so in this sense, I want to say Rousseau represents the past. So Rousseau represents the past. Again, let me make this a new slide. So Rousseau represents the past. So Rousseau and Hegel and Marx on free obedience. Rousseau represents again the past of ancient republics. The Hegel represents the present of the nation state, and Marx represents the hope for the future of cosmopolitan international workers' nation. So world communism, right? And like this, approximately, right? And so what I'm driving at, the point I'm trying to make is that there's a certain, I think, unity of style and purpose between these three thinkers, Rousseau, Hegel, and Marx. And I think it's important to read them together and to try to understand them in light of one another, right? So we have to see how Hegel, in his Rechtsstaat, tries to draw a certain picture of the realization of Rousseauian general will, and then Marx is asking how can this be transmitted, transferred, projected onto the whole world. But notice, neither of the three, and this is a Hobbesian element in all three. All three would not, I would say, would not regard the ancient republic or the nation state or world communism as like automatic, natural, or easy, right? For all three philosophers agree with Hobbes that then there has to be a mechanism. So Rousseau, Hegel, and Marx agreeing with Hobbes that there has to be a that order is artificial, right? And there has to be a mechanism for achieving harmonious social order. So mechanism for achieving social harmony. Like, it doesn't just fall from the sky. This is why I have to say that I have become completely tone deaf to anarchist philosophy, because to me this is anarchist philosophy here. This is scientific, to borrow a phrase from Marx, scientific anarchism versus empty utopian anarchism, right? Because there has to be a mechanism. And when I say anarchism, yeah, I want to say that there's an important anarchist element in Rousseau and Hegel and Marx, because we're talking about free obedience. This is what anarchism means, right? Like real working anarchy, and not some utopian or anarchy in the pejorative term. The problem of political authority, right? How obedience is like again, from Rousseau to Hegel to Marx to Jürgen Habermas, again, the Zwanglos und Zwang des Besseren arguments, right? The only force that a free citizen recognizes is the peculiarly unforced force of the better argument. How can we make this work? So maybe let me add Habermas to the board, right? Unforced force. Compare this to free obedience, right? And of course, I'm talking about Habermas. Let's compare this to John Stuart Mill, his ideas of free and equal discussion, which is why, to me, in many ways, Mill is like a post-Marxist philosopher. I feel that Mill is mostly talking about the communist future, not really about the present. Okay. I should be wrapping this up. I haven't gone through everything I had on the board, so Darwin, Nietzsche, and Foucault are going to have to wait for next time, I guess. Any last things I want to say? So I think I wanted to make a comment about this stuff. Oh yeah, so we talked about mechanisms, right? So the mechanism for Rousseau is the miracle of the lawgiver. Miracle of the lawgiver. You could say, Alex, miracles are not mechanisms. And I want to say, yes, miracles are not mechanisms. I'm sorry, yeah, this is a weak point in Rousseau, but what can you do? Nobody's perfect. Yes, Rousseau like needs to be substituted, right? Hegel says, no. So the miracle of the lawgiver is how you get the true social contract in ancient republics, right? For Hegel, no miracle. There's this historical process. Process, right? And for Marx, but this historical process for Hegel relies very much on competition between states. I wonder if I can make this fit. But almost. Well, not quite. Okay, apologies. So miracle of the lawgiver. Okay, so Hegel, present nation states, Marx, future world communism, but here again the mechanism is not like it has to be not just history, but it has to be history of technology, history of material production, history of of modes of production, right? So especially this idea. So historical process of competition between states. Of national rivalry, right? But here, for Marx, the idea is that the mode of production will be such, right, that basically, how should I best phrase this, right? That this will force the individuals to cooperate, on the global scale. How capitalism will lead to wages necessarily falling below subsistence. This will force the workers to unionize, and this will force humanity to unite, right? And that's a very strong assertion. That's a very high stakes, very tough challenge to overcome, right? And I feel that Rousseauian past, to me, seems to be fairly, I don't know, realistic, achievable, not really utopian. And I can see Hegelian ideas of, you know, the realization of Hegelian ideas in human history, at least to some extent, But the Marxist future is precarious to me. Like I don't see a natural or inevitable path towards this communist utopia. And sort of, you know, I have this phrase I like to finish my classes with, right? And this class is not going to be an exception, right? So for Marx, I think the past is there, the present is there, but the future is not given. Socialism or barbarism? Socialism or barbarism? Isn't this why we're here today, right? So I promised you the best, sorry, not the best, but the most important overriding questions in a short presentation, right, today. And, you know, this is the question, I think. This is the question for us in 2021, right? So with the global challenges of pandemic, nuclear proliferation, climate change, pollution, etc., etc. This is the challenge. Socialism or barbarism, where are we going? You know, and just to be a little bit controversial, let me maybe even phrase this in terms of the Fermi paradox. Fermi paradox. Right? Can we overcome the great filter? Is there a great filter, and can we overcome it? Anyway, I feel like I need to maybe catch my breath a little bit. So I suppose let me pause here. I hope that this was fun, useful, stimulating. I'll try to maybe do another pass and focus maybe more on the six thinkers. Anyway, you know, that's it for now. Thank you for your company. It's always more fun to talk about these things out loud to other people rather than just in my own head. So again, I hope that this will stimulate some thoughts in your head. And so, as always, colleagues, as always, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you around.